Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the Elder Lore podcast, and thanks for waiting a little bit longer than normal for this episode. At the beginning of the week, I didn't really have a voice, so I've had to wait a couple of days in order to record this episode, which I have had written for a number of days now. What I would like to talk about in our 6th episode is the three empires of Tamriel, and I am, of course, referring to, the first being the Alessian Empire, the Raymond dynasty that came after it, and then, of course, we're going to devote most of our time talking about Tiber Septim and the forging of his empire, which is commonly known as the Third Empire. All right? So we have kind of a episode in 3 acts today, beginning with Act 1, Queen Alessia and the Amulet of Kings. In our previous episode, we talked about how the Natick tribes living in central Tamriel had to, even from their first days, fight against their slave masters, who were the Ayleids. There was a girl born during this time. Her name was Al-Esh, who, like everybody else, was born into bondage. She would pray often to Akatosh and to other Aedra for help in freeing the men from the bonds of their Daedra-worshipping Ayleid overlords, one might say. She supposedly was granted 3 visions from Akatosh, and she is, of course, convinced to form an army and begin a rebellion. With the help of Mora House, who was kind of a consort to Alessia, also kind of a demigod, a hero of men at the time, and another champion, Pelinal Whitestrake, and, of course, some reinforcements from Skyrim, the war against the Ayleids begin. It is said that the Ayleids called Daedra forth. They summoned Daedra from the Plains of Oblivion to fight for them and with them. But despite this fact, as time wore on, the rebellion kept gaining speed. In the year 243 of the First Era, the Alessian forces surrounded the White Gold Tower, which, of course, is the Ayleid fortress that would later be the Imperial City. According to legend, the Alessian forces were hesitant to attack. It was a very well-defended fortress, but Pelinal Whitestrake storms the tower himself and faces down Umaril, who is also known as Umaril the Unfeathered. This is all lore that you learn playing Oblivion if you've played through the Knights of the Nine add-on. Umaril is, of course, defeated by Whitestrake, but he manages to escape into Meridia's realm and survive there in spirit form. He had some kind of a agreement with Meridia beforehand that granted him this kind of quote-unquote immortality. You could kill his body, but his spirit would forever survive in Meridia's realm. Meridia, if you are unaware, is one of the Daedric princes. So, of course, he comes back eventually, and this is what leads to the events of the Knights of the Nine expansion. Back to our story, however, the Alessians are victorious. They push the rest of the Ayleids out over time. Some sources say that it's in fact possible that some of the Ayleids still survive, hiding in the dense forests of Valenwood, but I think it's widely accepted that most of them are killed off. This is when the Amulet of Kings is passed down to Queen Alessia by Akatosh as a symbol of the divine right of Alessia to rule over the Empire of Men. Akatosh has taken pity on the plight of men. He has imbued this amulet with his own blood, and it's kind of a symbol of Akatosh's promise to stop Daedra from being able to be summoned in Mundus. In other words, cutting off the Ayleids from their major source of military power. The Amulet of Kings supposedly is actually a soul gem. It was supposedly of Ayleid origin. It's called the Kaim El Adabal, or the Red Diamond. It's a large red diamond surrounded by 8 other smaller gemstones that represent the 8 divines. And keep in mind, this is long before Tiber Septim has ascended to godhood himself and become Talos, so at this time there are only 8 divines. And this pantheon was actually created by Alessia herself as a compromise between the traditional Aldmeri gods and the pre-existing beliefs of the Nadic tribes. It wasn't until Tiber Septim's apotheosis that the 8 becomes 9, but we'll talk about that in the 3rd act. So, as I said, the Amulet of Kings supposedly contains within itself the blood of Akatosh himself. Akatosh also gives to Alessia the dragon fires, which burn in a bier in the Temple of the One, which is inside the Imperial City, which is now, of course, under the control of men. And it serves as a barrier to keep, as I said, the forces of Oblivion from crossing over into Mundus. After Alessia passes away, supposedly she is given the amulet on her deathbed, the throne passes to Gorias, who passes it to Herta, who expands the empire all the way out to High Rock, but eventually the empire grows too large to sustain peace within itself, and some internal strife within the Alessian order begins, and the empire is eventually dissolved. All right, and that brings us to Act 2, the Raymond Dynasty. According to the Remonada, that's, of course, a book you can find in-game, the Nordic king Harald goes in search of Queen Alessia's ghost, who supposedly wore the Amulet of Kings around her neck. He finds her, they couple, quote-unquote, and on that spot, Raymond I is found wearing the amulet around his head. Obviously, that's what legend says. I'm sure the truth is slightly different. But at any rate, Raymond I is able to unite Cyrodiil again at the end of the First Era. So, Raymond was a petty lord in Colovia within the nation of Cyrodiil. He was able to convince some of the neighboring armies to band together in order to fight an incoming threat from Akavir. There's a great battle. There's an Akaviri fort in Pale Pass, which you can find in Oblivion, I'm pretty sure. But the Cyrodiils emerge victorious. So, following their victory over the Akaviri forces, Raymond is able to unite almost all of Tamriel against another incoming threat, this time from the High Elves in Somerset Isle, including, in fact, gaining some allies within the Akavir. Eventually, the defeat of the Argonians at the Battle of Argonia folds that nation into the Empire, renaming it Black Marsh. And it is also important to note that Raymond I is also responsible for instituting a lot of the rituals and ceremonies that survive well into the future, including the lighting of the dragon fires at the ascendance of every new heir to the throne using the Amulet of Kings. It's kind of a symbolic gesture. So, Raymond II attempts to forcibly bring Morrowind into the Empire, but the tribunal proves to be successful and independent leaders. and the nation appears to not really need the Empire. But at any rate, a treaty is signed between the two of them eventually, leaving Morrowind mostly autonomous and bringing it into the Empire. The Raymond dynasty ends, however, in assassination. If you get a chance, I know it's a really long read, but I would recommend collecting and reading all of the books in the 2920 series, the last year of the First Era, because they really beautifully illuminate all of these events that I'm talking about right now. Raymond III's potentate, Versailles, who is from Akabir, secretly orders the assassination of both Raymond III and his heir, Prince Juliek, by the Morag Tong, which were the precursors to the Dark Brotherhood who headquartered within Morrowind. So Versailles assumes control of the Empire as potentate until he, in turn, is assassinated by the Morag Tong and passes the throne on to his son, Savarian Chorak, who, of course, is assassinated along with all of his heirs. So, at the end of this long string of assassinations, in the year 430 of the Second Era, the Second Empire of Tamriel ends. There would be a period after this, called the Interregnum, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, where there's really no ruling party in Tamriel or Cyrodiil specifically. There's a lot of bickering between small nation states, and all of this ends, of course, at the coming of Tiber Septim. So, the third act of our episode today, Tiber Septim forges the Third Empire of Tamriel. Talos, Dragonborn, Tiber Septim, Hjalti Earlybeard, Izmir, the Dragon of the North in some cases, all of these names refer to one person, and this is the person who creates the Third Empire. He's considered by many to be the greatest emperor in the history of Tamriel, and he is the man who would transcend mortality and eventually become a god himself. There are two diverging accounts of Talos' life, however, each of which are very different from the other. But in the first version, which, if I'm not mistaken, is more widely believed than the latter, has Talos being born in Skyrim. When he's in his 20s, after retaking Old Hroldan from the Witchmen of High Rock, growing storms in Skyrim signal that the Greybeards, all the way up in High Hrothgar, are going to speak soon. So the storms grow progressively worse. Soon the towns that are nearest to the throat of the world are evacuated. But of course, during this mass exodus from the area, there is one person who is headed the opposite direction, up the mountain. And that, of course, is Talos. He arrives at High Hrothgar. The Greybeards remove their gags and speak his name. The world shakes, and supposedly the Greybeards tell him that one day he would rule all of Tamriel. So later on, he begins his military career. He is a regarded general under King Khulakain, who is a petty Colovian lord who manages to kind of conquer the imperial city and proclaim himself emperor. Under Khulakain's rule, an allied Nord and Breton army attacks Cyrodiil from Skyrim, making camp at the fort of Sancre Tor. Khulakain sends General Talos, his best and most highly regarded general, to squash the invasion. So, it's important, of course, to note that Sankar Tor is supposedly impregnable. It's got really high walls in the front, and behind it, it's up against unscalable cliffs. But thanks to an unnamed traitor, Talos learns of a secret pathway through the cliffs and a secret fort entrance underneath an illusory lake behind the fort. So, long story short, the Nord-Breton army is taken by surprise, relatively quickly conquered. Many of the Nord soldiers and generals join forces with Talos, now seeing his military prowess and seeing him as their true leader, and most of the Bretons are executed. In the year 854 of the Second Era, a Breton knight Blade supposedly sneaks into the Imperial Palace, assassinates Cuchulainn, almost kills Talos, slitting his throat, and sets fire to the palace. The first volume of the Pocket Guide to the Empire chronicles this moment, when all of Tamriel would be changed forever, and it reads, quote, "But from the smoldering ruin he came, one hand to his neck and with Cuchulainn's crown in the other. The legions wept at the sight. His northern magic had saved him, but the voice that led them would be more silent from that night on. His word could no longer rout an army with a roar, but he could still command one with a whisper. He took for himself a Cyrodiilic name, Tiber Septim, and the Nordic name of kings, Ysmir, the Dragon of the North. And with those names he took, too, the red diamond crown of the Cyrodiils, and became their true emperor. Thus was born the Third Empire of Men." The Arcturian Heresy, which is a book written by Under King Ysmir Kingmaker, has a completely different version of events. The term Under King is sometimes used to refer to Tiber Septim's imperial battle mage, Zurin Arctis, but for this purposes it refers to Ysmir Kingmaker, who is also Wulfarth, King of Skyrim. It is also believed that Wulfarth is an avatar of Shor, which is the Nordic version of Lorkhan. This explains why, according to the lore, Wulfarth is able to die 3 times and be reborn. And he writes in the Arcturian Heresy that Tiber Septim was not, in fact, a Nord, but that he was a Breton from High Rock. He says that when the Greybeards prepared to speak, it was Wulfarth who goes to see them, thinking that he is the chosen one. But this is not the case, because when the Greybeards speak, he is blasted into ash. They tell him that the chosen one is known as Hjalti Earlybeard, and he will unite Tamriel and become the first emperor of Tamriel. Hjalti, at this time, was supposedly a great strategist and tactician. It falls to him to conquer Old Hroldan, what was commonly believed to be an impossible task. But a storm rises, and the storm speaks to Hjalti while he's in his tent. When the sun rises, Hjalti walks to the walls of Old Hroldan, a great storm about him that tossed aside arrows like twigs, and he uses his shouts to blow apart the walls of Hroldan, allowing his soldiers to enter into the fort unmolested. So it's here that the Nords join his cause, calling him Talos, which means storm crown. And according to Wulfarth, the Breton assassin who murders Cuchulainn is not a Nightblade, but rather Talos himself, who is just looking to get the crown. And so, Talos begins his conquest of Tamriel, with Wulfarth at his side, who is constantly trying to convince him to conquer the Dunmer in Morrowind, who were long-standing enemies of Wulfarth. Talos focuses instead on the human realms for as long as he can, which are proving difficult enough for him to hold on to, but the need for Morrowind's ebony eventually becomes too great. Apparently, trying to hold together an empire is expensive work, and the ebony that is naturally found in Morrowind would do a great deal for the maintenance of the empire. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, Zurin Arctis, who is, as I said, Tiber Septim's Imperial Battle Mage, is on a conquest to find the scattered pieces of the Numidium. This is not the original Numidium, mind you, but the remake that appears during the events of the game Daggerfall. But the only thing missing is the soul gem that powers it. So, Wulfharth, meanwhile, is realizing that in Morrowind, Dagoth-Ur is a growing threat. And you may remember Dagoth-Ur from our episode about the original Numidium. So Wulfharth returns to Tiber Septim to take control of his old army in order to take the fight to Morrowind, but it's a trap. Wulfharth is ambushed. Upon returning to Tiber Septim, Zurin Arctis attempts to capture Wulfharth's soul into a soul gem that he will use to power the Numidium. Wulfharth's soul is imprisoned within the Mantella, which is the name of the soul gem, and during the struggle, Zurin Arctis is killed. Side note, he does of course later reanimate himself, although it may also be true that before Wulfharth is imprisoned in the soul gem, he is able to possess Zurin Arctis' body, which leads to the reanimation. And this is why the title of Underking is sometimes interchangeable between those two characters. And of course, all of these events are according to King Wulfharth Ismir, Underking, Avatar of Lorkhan. Regardless of which story you believe, Tiber Septim is responsible for conquering all the lands of Tamriel and uniting them under his rule. He wouldn't have been able to do so without the Numidium, which is powered by the Soul Gem, which is filled with the soul of the Underking. In the following decades, the entire continent experiences a period of extended peace, great prosperity. Tiber Septim is said to have ruled for a full 80 years, until his death at the age of 108. While most people revere Tiber Septim as being Talos, one of the 9 divines, some also believe that he is only one piece of Talos. Talos being a oversoul, which consists of actually pieces of Talos in addition to pieces of Wulfharth and pieces of Zurin Arctis. So this apotheosis, of course, harkens back to the Mantella, the soul gem that Zurin Arctis tried to imprison Wulfharth within. And of course, as we learned in our second episode about the Thalmor, the High Elves in Somerset Isle will never really forgive Tiber Septim for conquering the Aldmeri Dominion. And this is why at the signing of the White Gold Concordat, the worship of Talos is strictly forbidden. So, there's a lot of information here, and a lot of information equals a lot of opportunities for me to get stuff wrong. So, if you heard anything in this episode that you feel needs clarification, let me know. I would love to correct my mistakes because I don't want to give any false information out. I love this universe way too much to start spreading rumors that aren't true. So please, if you have corrections, send them to me and I will fix them. So I hope you enjoyed our episode. I hope you continue to listen. I hope you continue to send me. I'm getting a lot of good feedback on the blog, so please visit the blog, elderlord.wordpress.com. Send me feedback. Send me suggestions. At this point, I have no idea what I'm going to do for the next episode. So send me suggestions so that I can speak directly to you guys and talk about things that you guys really want to hear about. All right? Other than that, I think that's pretty much it. So thank you for listening. Yeah, thanks.